The suitcase landed on the front porch with a dull thud, followed by another, then another. Derek stood in the doorway of what had been his home for 8 years, watching his wife Natalie hurl his belongings onto the concrete with methodical fury. "I want you gone by tonight," she said, her voice cold and flat. "Vincent is moving in tomorrow." Derek felt his chest tighten. Vincent. The name that had been whispered in late-night phone calls, the reason for all those extra shifts at the hospital where Natalie worked as a nurse. He'd suspected for months, but confronting the reality felt like swallowing glass. "Nat, we can talk about this. We can go to counseling." "I don't want counseling," she interrupted, crossing her arms. "I want you out. Vincent makes me feel alive again. You're just stuck. A middle management nobody going nowhere." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Derek worked as an operations coordinator at a logistics company, pulling decent money but nothing spectacular. They'd always lived modestly, saving where they could. Apparently, modest wasn't enough anymore. "What about the house?" Derek asked quietly. "We bought this together." Natalie laughed, sharp and bitter. "The house is in my name, remember? You said it would help with the mortgage rates. Guess that worked out for me." She stepped back inside, her hand on the door. "Vincent has money, Derek. Real money. He's taking me to Barcelona next month. When's the last time you took me anywhere?" Derek wanted to remind her about the college loans he'd helped her pay off, the car he'd co-signed for when her credit was shot, the countless nights he'd worked overtime so she could take that advanced certification course. But looking at her face, beautiful, familiar, yet somehow belonging to a stranger now, he realized none of it mattered anymore. "I'll be gone in an hour," he said. "Good." The door slammed shut. Derek stood there for a long moment, the May evening sun beating down on his shoulders. Neighbors' curtains twitched. They'd heard the shouting, seen the spectacle. He felt the weight of their judgment, their pity, pressing down on him like a physical force. He loaded his belongings into his aging sedan, 8 years of life compressed into 4 suitcases and a dozen boxes. His tools, his books, his clothes, a framed photo of his late mother. Everything else belonged to the life he was leaving behind. As he pulled away from the curb, Derek glanced in the rearview mirror. Natalie stood at the window, arms wrapped around someone else. Vincent. Presumably. The man was tall, well-dressed even from a distance. Derek looked away. He drove to a budget motel on the edge of town, the kind with hourly rates posted discreetly on a back wall. The room smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The TV didn't work. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like rust-colored flowers. Derek sat on the edge of the sagging bed and pulled out his phone. His bank account showed $3,200. Not nothing, but not much. The joint account, the one with their real savings, had been cleaned out. Natalie had gotten there first. He could call his brother in Portland, but they hadn't spoken in 2 years after a stupid argument about politics. His father had remarried and moved to Florida, starting a new family at 55. Derek had no close friends. Work and marriage had consumed everything. For the first time since his mother's death 10 years ago, Derek cried. Not loud, theatrical sobs, but quiet tears that slid down his face while he stared at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how his life had fallen apart so completely. He fell asleep in his clothes, exhausted and hollow, with no idea that this terrible night was actually the beginning of something else entirely. The first month was survival. Derek rented a studio apartment in a rougher part of town, 400 square feet with a kitchenette, a bathroom the size of a closet, and neighbors whose arguments pierced through the thin walls at all hours. But it was his, paid for with money he earned. He threw himself into work with an intensity that surprised his colleagues. The logistics company he worked for was struggling with inefficiencies, hemorrhaging money on poor routing and outdated systems. Derek had always noticed the problems but had never spoken up. Why rock the boat? Now, he had nothing to lose. He presented a comprehensive analysis to his supervisor, outlining how they could cut costs by 30% through better route optimization and vendor consolidation. His boss, a pragmatic woman named Gabriella, was impressed enough to bring it to upper management. "Why haven't you brought this to us before?" the CEO asked during the presentation. Derek answered honestly, "I wasn't confident enough. I am now." The changes were implemented. Within 3 months, the company saved over $2 million. Derek was promoted to Senior Operations Director with a substantial raise. But the money wasn't what drove him anymore. It was proving to himself that Natalie had been wrong. In the evenings, Derek enrolled in an online MBA program. He studied at the coffee shop downstairs from his apartment, surrounded by struggling artists and night shift workers. He learned about supply chain management, business analytics, and strategic planning. What started as distraction became genuine passion. 6 months after being thrown out, Derek had transformed physically too. The stress had initially caused him to lose weight, but he joined a bare-bones gym and started lifting weights, running. Not for vanity, but because the physical exertion quieted his mind. The soft middle-aged body Natalie had sneered at was replaced by something leaner, harder. He didn't date. Women showed interest, the barista at his regular coffee shop, a colleague from work, but Derek wasn't ready. The wound was still too fresh, and he had no desire to drag his mess into someone else's life. One evening, while reviewing inventory reports, Derek received a LinkedIn message from Theo, a former college roommate who'd gone into tech consulting. They'd lost touch after graduation, but Theo had seen Derek's professional updates. "Your company's wasting your talent," Theo wrote. "I'm starting a supply chain optimization startup. We need someone who understands logistics from the ground up. Interested?" Derek stared at the message for a long time. Leaving a stable job with benefits for a startup was risky, especially when he was still rebuilding. But stability was what had kept him trapped before. He typed back, "Tell me more." 3 weeks later, Derek gave his notice. Gabriella was disappointed but understanding. "You're meant for bigger things," she said. "Don't forget us when you're running the world." The startup, Chainlink Solutions, operated out of a converted warehouse with 6 employees including Derek. Theo handled the tech side while Derek managed operations and client relations. They worked 16-hour days, living on coffee and takeout, building algorithms that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies managed their supply chains. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was the most alive Derek had felt in years. The first year was brutal. They nearly went bankrupt twice. But gradually, clients came. A regional grocery chain. A manufacturing company. A pharmaceutical distributor. Each success built momentum. By the end of year 2, Chainlink Solutions had 20 employees and annual revenue in the 7 figures. Derek was now Chief Operating Officer, with an equity stake that would be worth real money if they continued growing. He'd moved into a decent apartment in a better neighborhood, bought a reliable car, and could afford nice things. But he still lived modestly, remembering too well what it felt like to count every dollar. Derek rarely thought about Natalie anymore. When he did, it was with a distant sort of curiosity rather than pain. He wondered occasionally how she was doing, if Vincent had taken her to Barcelona, if she was happy. He never looked her up on social media. That chapter was closed. 3 years and 4 months after being thrown out, Derek stood in the produce section of an upscale grocery store, examining avocados with the seriousness of a jeweler appraising diamonds. Chainlink Solutions had just closed a major contract with a national retailer, and Theo had insisted they celebrate properly, which apparently meant Derek making guacamole from scratch for the company party. He was debating between Hass and Florida avocados when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, could you, Derek?" He turned, and time seemed to stutter. Natalie stood 3 feet away, a shopping basket hanging from her arm. She looked different. Older, obviously, they both were, but something else too. Her hair, once carefully highlighted, showed grey roots. The designer clothes she'd always coveted hung loose on a frame that had grown thin. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They looked exhausted, haunted. "Natalie." The name came out neutral, a statement of fact. Wow. "I can't believe," she laughed nervously, tucking hair behind her ear. "How are you? You look really good." Derek glanced down at himself. Tailored jeans, a button-down shirt, good shoes. He'd stopped at this grocery store specifically because it was near the office and stayed open late. Pure coincidence. I'm well, thanks. You? The simple question seemed to deflate her. I'm managing. It's been a tough few years. She gestured vaguely, her hand trembling slightly. Are you still at the logistics company? No, I left about 3 years ago. I'm COO at a tech startup now. Her eyebrows rose. Cool. Derek, that's amazing. I always knew you were capable of more. She stopped, seeming to think better of whatever she'd been about to say. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by the ambient store music and the murmur of other shoppers. Derek felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, no lingering affection. Just a mild curiosity about this person he used to know. Vincent and I split up, Natalie said abruptly. About a year ago. Turns out his real money was mostly debt and a good sales pitch. He left me with about 40,000 in credit card bills. I'm sorry to hear that. Our house, I had to sell it. The market was terrible, and after paying off the liens Vincent had secretly put on it, I barely broke even. She laughed again, that nervous, brittle sound. I'm renting a place near the old neighborhood. 1 bedroom. It's an adjustment. Derek nodded, unsure what she wanted from him. Sympathy? Vindication that he'd been the better choice all along? I see you around sometimes, Natalie continued. Well, not you exactly, but I see articles. Chainlink Solutions, that's your company, right? There was a piece in the business section about supply chain innovation. We've been fortunate. Fortunate, she repeated softly. You were always so modest. She shifted her weight, basket creaking. Look, I know this is completely out of the blue, but would you want to get coffee sometime? Catch up properly? I'd really like to. I don't think that's a good idea, Derek said gently. Natalie's face fell. Oh, right. Of course. You probably have someone in your life now. I just thought. It's not about that. I'm actually single. I'm just not interested in revisiting the past. I'm not trying to, she stopped, swallowed hard. Derek, I'm trying to apologize. For how I treated you. For what I said. I was cruel and I was wrong, and I've regretted it every single day since. Derek believed her. He could see the regret written plainly on her face, hear it in her voice. But he also knew that her regret had far more to do with how things had turned out than with any genuine remorse about hurting him. I appreciate that, he said. And I forgive you, truly. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconnect, Ion. You made a choice 3 years ago, and I've built a completely different life since then. I'm not the same person anymore, and I don't think revisiting what we had, or what went wrong, serves either of us. Tears welled in Natalie's eyes. I made such a terrible mistake. Maybe, Derek said. Or maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. I wouldn't be where I am now if you hadn't pushed me out. The encounter haunted Derek for days, though not in the way he'd expected. He didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. He didn't feel angry or hurt. Mostly, he felt a deep, profound sadness for Natalie, for the choices she'd made, for the life she'd lost, for the desperation he'd seen in her eyes. But he didn't change his mind about reconnecting. Theo noticed Derek's distraction during a client meeting. Afterward, over drinks at a bar near the office, Derek told him about running into Natalie. Damn, Theo said, swirling his bourbon. How'd it feel? Seeing her struggle while you're crushing it. Empty, Derek admitted. I thought I'd feel satisfied, you know? That she'd see what she threw away. But I just felt nothing. And then sad for her. That's growth, man. The fact that you're not gloating means you've actually moved past it. Theo studied him. She asked to get back together. Not explicitly. But she wanted to reconnect, catch up. She apologized. And you said? No. Theo raised his glass. Good. That chapter's closed. Don't reopen it just because she's having regrets. Derek clinked his glass against Theo's, but the conversation stayed with him. Had he been too harsh? Too cold? The old Derek, the one who'd loved Natalie, who'd have done anything to make her happy, whispered that maybe he should have given her a chance to explain, to really apologize. But the new Derek, the one who'd rebuilt himself from nothing, knew better. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. 2 weeks later, Natalie emailed him. He saw the notification on his phone during a board meeting and felt his stomach drop. He didn't open it until that evening, alone in his apartment with a glass of wine. Derek, I know you said you weren't interested in reconnecting, and I respect that. I'm not writing to change your mind. I'm writing because I need to say things I should have said 3 years ago, and I need to say them whether you respond or not. You were a good husband. You were kind and patient and steady, and I treated all of those qualities like they were weaknesses instead of strengths. I was so focused on what I thought I was missing, excitement, adventure, wealth, that I couldn't see what I actually had. Vincent promised me a different life, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be someone else, someone more exciting and sophisticated. But that person doesn't exist. I'm just me, and I threw away a real life for a fantasy. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm not asking you to forgive me beyond what you already have. I just need you to know that you deserved better than how I treated you, and I'm truly, deeply sorry. I'm glad you're successful. I'm glad you're happy. You earned it. Take care of yourself. Natalie. Derek read the email 3 times. It was genuine, he thought. No hidden agenda, no attempt at manipulation. Just honest regret and acknowledgement. He typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, he settled on something simple. Natalie. Thank you for the apology. I know it took courage to send it. I meant what I said at the store. I forgive you. We both made mistakes in our marriage, and we both contributed to its end in different ways. You were brave enough to make a choice, even if it was the wrong one. That takes something. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you find peace and stability and someone who makes you happy. You deserve that. But you won't find it by looking backward. Trust me on that, I've learned it firsthand. Take care. Derek. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then closed his laptop and went to bed. He never heard from her again. 6 months after the chance encounter, Chainlink Solutions was acquired by a major tech conglomerate for a sum that made Derek's equity stake worth more money than he'd ever imagined having. He wasn't wealthy by Silicon Valley standards, but he was comfortable, very comfortable, with enough in the bank to never worry about money again. Theo decided to retire at 38, moving to Costa Rica to surf and teach coding to local kids. Derek stayed on as COO of the newly merged company, finding he genuinely enjoyed the work even without the startup hustle and financial pressure. He bought a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, though he had no kids and no immediate plans for any. The house had a woodworking shop in the garage, and Derek discovered a passion for building furniture. There was something deeply satisfying about creating tangible things with his hands, watching rough lumber transform into functional beauty. He started dating again, casually at first. A graphic designer named Simone. A professor named Julian. A chef named Priya. Nothing serious, but pleasant companionship with interesting people who'd built their own lives and weren't looking to him for rescue or completion. Derek thought about Natalie sometimes, usually when he passed the old neighborhood or shopped at that grocery store. He wondered how she was doing, if she'd managed to rebuild, if she'd found happiness. He genuinely hoped she had. Carrying anger or resentment would have been like dragging chains, exhausting and pointless. One Sunday afternoon, while finishing a dining table in his shop, Derek's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Is this Derek Hammond? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Speaking. My name is Catherine Lewis. I'm a reporter with the Business Chronicle. I'm doing a feature on mid-career professionals who've successfully transitioned into tech leadership, and your story kept coming up in my research. Would you be willing to speak with me? Derek leaned against his workbench, sawdust dusting his clothes. What exactly would this involve? An interview about your background, your transition from traditional logistics to tech, What drove the change? Your company's acquisition was notable, and several people I spoke with mentioned you as someone who exemplifies resilience and adaptability. Resilience and adaptability. Once, those words would have felt like consolation prizes. Now, they felt like accurate descriptions of who he'd become. Sure, Derek said. I can do that. The interview happened 2 weeks later in a coffee shop downtown. Catherine was sharp and thorough, asking questions that went beyond the surface level of his professional achievements. What was the catalyst? She asked. The moment you decided to change direction. Derek thought about that night in the motel, crying in his clothes, feeling like his life had ended. He thought about the humiliation, the fear, the overwhelming sense of loss. Rock bottom, he said finally. Sometimes you have to lose everything to figure out what you're actually capable of. And did you lose everything? I thought I did. Turns out I only lost the things that were holding me back. The article ran 3 weeks later. Derek's phone exploded with messages, old colleagues, former classmates, distant relatives he hadn't heard from in years. Everyone congratulating him, telling him how inspiring his story was, how they'd always known he'd do great things. He replied politely to the genuine ones and ignored the rest. Among the messages was one from an unknown email address with no subject line. Derek almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity made him open it. I saw the article. I'm proud of you. I hope you stay happy. N. Derek stared at the message for a long moment, then archived it without responding. Some stories don't need epilogues. That evening, he finished the dining table he'd been building, walnut, with careful joinery and a hand-rubbed oil finish. It was beautiful in a simple, honest way. Exactly what he'd envisioned when he'd started. He ran his hand across the smooth surface, feeling the grain beneath his palm. This, he thought, was what mattered. Not revenge or vindication or proving anything to anyone. Just building something good, something that would last, something he could be proud of. Derek loaded the table into his truck and drove it to a woman who'd commissioned it for her first house. She was a recent divorcee, starting over at 43, and she cried when she saw it. It's perfect, she said, running her fingers along the edge. It's exactly what I needed. I'm glad, Derek said. And he was. Driving home through the evening traffic, Derek felt something settle in his chest, not happiness exactly, but contentment. Peace. The knowledge that he'd survived the worst thing that had ever happened to him and come out the other side not bitter or broken, but whole. Better than whole. Rebuilt. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe he'd meet someone special. Maybe he'd stay single. Maybe he'd leave the corporate world and build furniture full-time. Maybe he'd do something he hadn't even imagined yet. What he did know was that he'd be fine either way. He'd learned the most important lesson of all: he didn't need anyone else to complete him. He was already complete. Natalie had thrown him out thinking he had nothing, that he was nothing. She'd been wrong. He'd had everything that mattered, the capacity to grow, to change, to rebuild. Those things couldn't be taken away. As he pulled into his driveway, Derek smiled. Not because he'd won something or proven something or gotten revenge, but because for the first time in years, he was genuinely, deeply at peace with exactly who he was and where he was going. And that, he thought, was the real victory.